you could make a start. And
yes,
so pleased to have you on the conference. So much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, David. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I will pick up on some of those words that have come through already before we've even started. And so, well, it's great that we're having this conversation, and congratulations to everybody in pulling it together to be able to do something online, if not in person. And obviously, it would be much nicer if we could see each other. But hopefully, we'll be able to generate some wisdom through this virtual medium over the next couple of days. And yeah, a great pleasure to see the Catchment Sensitive Farming Partners and the Sustainable Food Trust coming together to organise this discussion. So one of the things that fascinates me, and I think for anyone with an ecological interest, this is a source of fascination, is maps. And you find yourself poring over different maps that set out the geography of different parts of the country, and you see roads, and you see county boundaries, and you see towns and cities, and if you zero in on some of the designations, you see national parks and national nature reserves and sites of special scientific interest. And that tells us something about how the land works. But actually, the real map, the one that conveys the most fundamental realities of how things work, of course, is the map that reveals the river catchments. And I came the other day with a rather beautiful one of the British Isles, setting out the different watersheds and the main rivers that drain the land. And of course, it's that map which in the end conveys the fundamentals of geology, of soil and of water, which actually tells us the most about the future sustainability of the land, and indeed the ways in which we have not achieved sustainability at the moment, because those maps that convey the county boundaries and the sites of special scientific interest and all the rest of it, those generally are still the maps that we use for much of our planning, when in fact it's that broader ecological map which is the one that we need to be more focused upon. And as a result of not generally, for many decades, having seen that catchment template as the basic one to work from, we've had some very well-intentioned efforts and approaches, but they've tended to be piecemeal. And as a result of being piecemeal, even though they have been very well-intentioned and structured in intelligent ways, they've actually not delivered what we need to deliver. That fragmentation of effort has led us to continue to see these really quite troubling and gloomy statistics around the continuing state of the environment declining. And the evidence is not only in data, it's there in some quite vivid and powerful images. One that I often use in lectures is a map of the British Isles, a photograph of the British Isles from space, taken in March 2014 after that very, very wet winter. And around the coast of the British Isles, you see this brown fringe, particularly near the main river estuaries by the Humber, by the Thames and by the Severn. And of course, that brown fringe in the sea is our principal food growing medium, washed off the land and out into the ocean, down the rivers. And part of the story there, of course, is the impact on river quality, because the soil particles are taking with them nutrients that have been applied to the land to promote crop production. And those nutrients cause a range of ecological impacts, not least eutrophication, which then in the worst cases, as we all know, can lead to dead zones in coastal waters. And that problem is a profound one. And when you see water traveling off of the land, which is more the colour of cocoa than it is Perrier water, we've got some really quite fundamental challenges at hand. And of course, that those issues linked with environmental pollution and soil loss are associated with the decline of wildlife, both in terms of direct impacts and also some of the same trends in terms of soil damage also leading to damage to food webs and the decline of biodiversity in the farmed landscape. And so we can paint a pretty vivid picture of how things continue to be less sustainable, if not unsustainable. And this is obviously something that not only is about the environment, it also goes to the heart of the sustainability of farm businesses, because that asset of soil is, of course, the ultimate asset for any food producer in terms of how we conduct the process of feeding people. And some of the numbers on this are truly terrifying. So one estimate that tells us of the scale of soil loss globally suggests about 25 billion tons of topsoil is departing the land every year globally, with a significant proportion of that going down British rivers and into the sea. So this is not something which is about the environment versus food. It's something which I think goes to the heart of the question of how we unite food production with a healthy environment, and how we find the business models that sit between the two, because at the end, this is not about finding ways of making farming more difficult or less profitable. It's got to be about ways of finding the means to support profitable farm businesses at the same time as halting and reversing some of these trends, which, globally over time do actually pose a real and material threat to the future of human civilization. I mean, it is that big in the sense of how soil underpins the well-being of societies globally. And so I mentioned before, this challenge that comes from, what has been over the years a pretty piecemeal approach, with different tools and different approaches being used in ways that haven't really added up to landscape scale impacts. And it seems to me that now is the main challenge at hand, is not only to lift the ambition to be able to halt some of those trends, but also to do it through integrating the different outcomes that we wish to see. And so I've mentioned a couple already. So one outcome we have to integrate is food production against the outcome of nature recovery, and the sustainability for the environment being integrated with sustainability for farm businesses. And so that is the fundamentals of the challenge. And this then raises big challenges around, how we integrate two other big pieces. And so one piece is integrating the activities of the different actors working in a particular catchment to be able to solve these problems through collaboration. And then the other integration is to bring together the many different policy tools that increasingly we have before us, and policy tools, and also an increasing number of targets. And if you get both of those to be geared up to getting beyond those false boundaries, those lines on maps in catchments, then I think we start to get somewhere. And this is easier said than done, because every organization I've ever been involved with, not least government departments, they work in silos, and for good reason. We do need to plan strategies in ways where we can come up with the KPIs, come up with the specific outcomes that are going to flow from different budget lines. But at the same time, it's very clear to me, and I'm sure many others, that there's now an additional job, which is about integrating those different pieces so that we finish up with impacts that are greater than the sum of the parts. And that's something now that we need to be looking to find ways of achieving. And I think the good news is that basic point is now largely understood. Certainly conversations I have with colleagues across the other DEFRA agencies, the Environment Agency, with colleagues working in DEFRA, certainly amongst the NGOs and many of the environmental writers and academics, that idea of integrated holistic approach with joined up outcomes, linking different objectives together into the same plan, that now I think is pretty well accepted. And so, the appetite to go towards more of that, I think, is there now. And there are a great many tools and initiatives that we have in the toolbox to be able to do this. And I just share a few with you. You'll be aware of all of these, but just to remind us then actually we've entered a pretty exciting place now on some of this stuff. And so we, for example, have the Environmental Land Management Scheme coming that will be focusing on the delivery of public goods through public funding. And this is a shift from the old area-based payments, and there is a great deal of complexity and a lot of detail to work through, but we can now see the emergence of a new farm support system that will have at its heart things like soil health and carbon, and which will be looking to restore wildlife populations, be seeking to find ways of harnessing agricultural methods to be able to improve water quality. And so this is a very exciting time, and that policy will become clearer later this month, we expect, as DEFRA begins to set out some more of the details based upon the work that's been done to date. And then we will have the full rollout of that new scheme in 2024. So a few years yet to still get that right, and being able to work at the level of catchments to make the most of that is going to be a really critical part of the puzzle, I would say. And happily, you know, we do have some examples of how we can do that through various farmer cluster experiences that are going on across the country, where there's been facilitation of groups of farmers to come together to work at those larger landscape scales beyond the farm gate of one holding and the next, to be able to look at the bigger picture. So that's hugely exciting, and I'm sure many people will be seeking to play that new policy into this space of sustainable catchment managements to get the real best benefits we can from that. And then at the same time, we have a strong focus on carbon, which is partly reflected in the ELM, but you know, we have this net zero carbon by 2050 adopted as an official legally binding goal of government, and an increasing level of interest going into not only the more obvious sectors of power, of heating and transport, but also beginning to look more at the land. And happily, you know, not only do we have that government 2050 target, the National Farmers Union have stepped up and said 2040 is going to be the target for that organisation. And we have the UK water companies coming forward with a target that is more ambitious still. So there's a lot of energy and a lot of momentum in the carbon space. And once you start drilling into carbon and looking at land, then you start to realise that it's not only trees that we need to be focusing on in terms of where we look to get that net carbon benefit, it's also critically soils. And of course, peat soils get a lot of the airtime for good reason, since they're made of pretty much pure carbon and water. But of course, agricultural soils to various extents do hold a lot of carbon, and could be holding an awful lot more if we adopted the right kinds of practices to improve the organic matter in the soil. And of course, in doing that, bringing many benefits for soil quality in terms of then being a benefit for farm businesses over time, hopefully enabling the use of less manufactured fertilizers through the capture of organic material derived from cover crops and other approaches, and also with the added benefit of being more drought resilient, which of course is the other end of this volatility that we're now finding as we get into this period of climate change, is that we're not only suffering from the effects of flooding, we're also suffering from the effects of drought. And certainly this year, watering the garden in April struck me as being quite unusual, but something I think we're going to be getting used to. And so being able to increase soil organic matter to catch carbon at the same time as improving growing media, at the same time as increasing drought resilience, at the same time as being able to reduce flood risk, because high organic matter holds more water, you know, you start to see some sweet spots emerging. And that net zero piece, I think, was going to be a big driver of that. And at the same time as we're talking about net zero, it's wonderful to see many people now joining the dots between that and this idea of nature-based solutions. And so these terrible flood events that we've seen during recent years, linked, of course, to extreme rainfall, but exacerbated through the quality of the poor quality of the land upon which that rain is falling. So whether it's a degraded peatland, a deforested hillside, or soils left bare at the peak period of rainfall, with that soil then filling up the riverbed, forcing the water over the side into people's homes and businesses. We can see that there is a lot that we can do to mitigate against that through improving the quality of the land. So nature-based solutions, looking at ways in which we might have nature-based adaptation to be able to deal with flooding preemptively, not only through concrete and engineering, and we do need that as well, but by investing in improvements to the land. And it's another very significant and very positive step that the government has invested a very large amount of money, £670 million, in this so-called Nature for Climate Fund, which will give us some ability to be able to invest in some of these nature-based solutions at the scale of catchments. And some of the money will be spent in recovering degraded peatlands, blocking up ditches, trying to get those places wet. And of course, that will have a benefit in terms of reducing emissions from the land, but will also have a benefit in being able to hold more water, creating crinkly land surfaces that will slow the flow from the landscape into the river courses, and thereby hopefully smooth off some flood peaks. And so there is a considerable opportunity there, and that Nature for Climate Fund, of course, will be one of the ways in which we begin to deliver on the government's target of 30,000 hectares of new woodland in the landscape every year, and blending that into catchments in the most intelligent ways, including along water courses, which I know is a subject of very intense scrutiny at the moment. Can we target that woodland budget, that woodland creation budget towards water courses and rivers? Will that bring the kind of benefits that we need from catchments? Well, yes, I think probably a great deal is to be gained from that. And all of these tools in nature, in the sense of nature-based solutions and in the sense of net zero, blend in beautifully into what is the main idea for Natural England at the moment, which is to focus on nature recovery to bring multiple benefits to the country: carbon capture, adaptation, an element of food security, water purity and security, and also public health and well-being. And so if we can begin to look at the scale of catchments through the local nature recovery strategies that will come from the Environment Bill, then I think we might find we have some really interesting planning templates through which we can build partnership and collaboration with the many actors working in different landscapes, and to begin to pull in all of these different tools to be able to back those visions that we can build from the bottom up. And at the same time, as I mentioned, the Environment Bill, another source of funding that will come in to agricultural landscapes during the coming years will be based on this idea of net gain. So the planning decisions that will be made in the future in relation to housing, and I'm hoping also in relation to infrastructure, there will be a legal requirement to pay for environmental improvements somewhere else. And there will be an emphasis on the localities, but those localities, all of them, will still be in catchments. And so if we can blend that tool also into this more integrated planning space, then we, I think, can get very far. And I must say that all these big ideas, nature recovery network, nature-based solutions, and how we're going to be able to unite farming and nature recovery, it all sounds pretty abstract and sounds pretty high level, and it is. But the great thing is, of course, that people are already doing it. And so, it's not as if now we are lacking inspiration from specific examples across the country. There is the farmer clusters already working, as I mentioned, the wildlife trusts and the RSPB and the National Trust engaged in really quite significant scale nature restoration. We're doing some of that in partnership with those and other organizations. The Environment Agency really now looking at nature-based solutions as part of its flood strategy. So we can see that the pennies are beginning to drop and connections are being made. And actually, most significantly in some ways, seeing private sector organizations making a real business case, and not only farmers from the point of view of their soils and their ability to produce food sustainably, but also further up the supply chains in the supermarkets, realizing that food is not only a commodity that needs to be produced as cheaply as possible. We also need to be looking at the wider costs in terms of flood risk, for example, and the quality of the environment we all depend upon. And then very excitingly too, I believe, is the extent to which the dots are being joined by water companies who can see very considerable upsides from a very hard-nosed business point of view in terms of investing in land as one way in which they can secure clean water supplies more cheaply than they might through expensive engineering dependent on chemicals and a great deal of electricity. So it strikes me as an incredibly exciting moment to be having this conversation. So it's absolutely brilliant that we're all able to get together like this and start tossing around a few of the ideas. But I think over the coming few years, we hopefully will see some very significant progress on some of this stuff. But it will depend, I believe, on being able to pull these threads together, threads of different interests in different catchments, and those threads of different policies to weave a new kind of cloth whereby we can go into landscapes with that joined up approach, use all these different tools to be delivering those integrated outcomes. And, you know, the many outcomes that we might secure here are, you know, of immense value to the country. More beautiful landscapes, that's on the agenda as well now, and being able to put more trees and more grasslands back into catchments. The ability to catch carbon and meet our very demanding targets on that subject, to be able to reduce flood risk, to have more beautiful rivers that we can swim and fish in, to have more vibrant nature in the countryside for people to walk and enjoy. So all of these things are positive upsides, and I'm convinced from what I've seen that this can all be delivered in very much an integrated fashion with secure and profitable farm businesses. And the more that we can get the supply chain from the government policies to the farmers through to the market, with organizations like the supermarkets helping to link that together, the better. So I'm just going to wish you all the very best for this couple of days of discussion. And, you know, we're all locked in and we can't actually do what we would like to be doing and meeting in person and getting outside. But maybe we use this period now for a period of reflection, and at least we can use Zoom to network and knock around ideas, and over this period perhaps form a new vision for 2021 and beyond, so we can literally hit the ground running, and very secure ground it will be, full of organic matter, catching lots of water and supporting lots of wildlife. So the discussions are going to be very rich, I'm sure, over this couple of days, and I do hope that people go away not only with some clear conclusions, and that point that came on the word cloud there about being clear, that's what we need. We need clarity, and that clarity of vision, of course, then backed by the work that we do in the field with our wellies on, ditch by ditch, field by field, stream by stream. If we can link that side of the work to the big picture, I think there's everything to play for. And so you have my best wishes for a great couple of days, and I'm very much looking forward to being out with some soil on my boots very soon with some of you as soon as conditions permit. So thank you so much, Dave. Back to you.
Oh, thanks, Tony. That's fantastic. Really good summary of the complexity of what we're faced with, and some hints towards how we approach it when we do get out and about more. So I'm just going to post another word cloud question. Thanks for all the questions in chat for Tony as well. Really good. And we'll allow some time for those. But first of all, do get on Slido, and it's another one-word Wordle question, and we'll see what that prompts. So here goes. And for people that were a bit late, we are recording the session, so you'll be able to see it on the proceedings and see Tony's keynote in its entirety. So fear not.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. Just starting to come in there. Oh, big rush now.
Okay, I've got to think of a word.
Don't overthink your word. That's what everyone says to me. Pouring in now.
Okay. Mm.
Oh yeah, we're past 35 now. Yeah, we're still ticking up quickly, so give it a minute or so.
Mm.
Optimistic, yeah, that's me.
Mm.
So certain words resonate, don't they?
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Mm.
Okay.
So, David, do you want to do one or two of these questions?
Okay, yeah, because they're pouring in still the
Yeah.
word. So yeah, that'd be good
Yeah.
actually.
Where do you want to
Yeah.
begin?
So well, has anything grab your attention? I just pull them out, shall I? Just go for it.
Yeah, just get quick whiz through them, shall we? Might be the thing to do.
Okay. So so Charlie said, agree on all the ideals mentioned. Key will be to keep it simple. So that's from
Yeah.
Charlie.
Yes. Well, I agree with that, and you know, this is the challenge of effective communications is to make things straightforward and understandable, but not to lose the complexity. And in fact, I'm just half remembering a quote from Albert Einstein that goes along the lines of, things should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. And I think that's a great maxim for this kind of thing, because we want to be able to communicate, but we don't want to put things in ways that actually you know, are not right. And so there's a fine line between simplicity and accuracy, but that's what we have to strive for. And you know, different ways of doing it. And yeah, you know, I think, you know, we can do it. You know, there's like a little narrative thread there, which is linked to, you know, that nature knows no boundaries. You know, and if nature does have boundaries, it's things like catchments. But you know, the links between water, air, and soil, they're fundamental, and so we have to treat them as a single thing. You know, I think we can paint the picture of why we need to take the kinds of approaches that I think we increasingly agree upon in terms of integrated and holistic ones. But being able to carry people on that journey is quite vital. And actually, you know, all this ecological and environmental stuff, especially when it starts getting involved in policy, you know, it becomes, you know, sometimes I struggle with it. I'm reading a paper and there's like 9 acronyms I've never seen before in the first paragraph. And we're all apt to do that. And, you know, we have to fight against that, especially when we're dealing with people who don't inhabit that world, and who, you know, people farming the land have got a very different view of life to people sitting in Whitehall conversations. And so bridging that gap is absolutely essential. So that communications piece, I couldn't agree with more, actually.
Cool. Okay. There's one from Al Stewart here. Do you think that thinking about integration, we need to consider carrying capacity of the land, water, food production, ecosystem services, housing, much more?
Yes, we do.
And do you think government understands, Al says?
I think some bits of government increasingly understand it. The way I would approach that is to say that, you know, the thing that's missing is any kind of land use strategy. And so, you know, this is something that in the context of catchments, you know, maybe some of the people on this kind of conversation can start to think through, you know, how do we advance that more strategic view? You know, at the moment, you know, well, always, you know, from the land, we need places to grow food, we need housing and urban space, we need infrastructure, we need water, we need carbon capture, we need places for people to have recreation, and we need to conserve our biodiversity. But what tends to happen is we don't approach land reduce choices by looking at all of those things at once, which I think is the only real rational way of doing it. Because if you take one at a time, which is what we tend to do, you finish up with all these binary arguments, which don't take us very far. So should there be food production or rewilding? Discuss. That's one dimension. Should there be green belt or housing? Discuss. Should there be a landscape or wind turbines? Discuss. And what you finish up with is these endless binary arguments with people against something and somebody else trying to propose something. And we can't really get beyond that because we don't have a view of all of those 9 or 10 things at once, which is what we ideally would do. And so, you know, in the absence of a policy framework that says that yet, you know, maybe there's things we can do at catchment level that can start to bring in some of that thinking through the different actors that are there. And, you know, it could be that the new planning policy that was being consulted on, I think the consultation has just stopped. Certainly from Natural England's point of view, we fed in the thought that, you know, if you're going to plan for housing, you have to plan for nature at the same time. It's irrational to do these two things separately because it's the same land that these things need to be accommodated upon. And so, you know, taking that view of, you know, the choices at that broader level, it does seem to be essential. Does government get it? I think some bits of government get it. And the more that we can all make that case about how we can arrive at better outcomes through taking that broader view, I think people will be convinced. And, you know, I think everyone's getting a bit fed up with having all these kinds of, you know, local kind of struggles and fights and arguments that in the end don't shed a lot of light. They take up a lot of energy, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot of support for that view actually coming out on the chat.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do one more because we're short of time. So this is from, I think it's Fraser, isn't it? Yeah, so it says, Tony, totally agree on integration of food production and environment, and certainly something we try to do on the ground through initiatives like Campaign for the Farmed Environment. On policy integration, do you see that happening with environmental and food policy? Seems to me that the two are still viewed as separate entities.
Well, I think it's happening. You know, the old silos that were there, you know, there's certainly still evidence that remains an issue. And as I said earlier, you know, it's perfectly understandable because complex organizations do need to organize themselves into departments and teams. And when you have that, you know, you start to get these things going off, you know, potentially slightly at divergent angles. But there's a lot of work going on at the level of government to try and pull this stuff together. And certainly the work we're doing at Natural England, not least through the work we're doing around the Nature Recovery Partnership, which will be about trying to pull different elements together to pursue integrated agendas. You know, there is progress being made, and the big test will be the ELM scheme on the policy side. But also, I would say, you know, this is not only something that government needs to get its head round. You know, the supermarkets and, you know, sometimes the dichotomy between, you know, price and competitiveness on the one hand and, you know, the environmental side on the other, and, you know, the extent to which that often isn't linked up either. And, you know, I see you have Morrison's there during the conference, and, you know, it'd be great to hear from them about some of the challenges they face and what they might need from the policymakers in being able to do this. Actually, just on that, David, I think that there's a really, really important point about all of this policy side, and that is the extent to which we can harness a market pull. So there's going to be some, you know, some stuff coming from government encouraging farmers to do certain things. That's very good. It would be made all the more powerful if there was simultaneously a pull into the marketplace. So can Tesco's, can Morrison's, can Sainsbury's communicate to their customers about what they're doing to be able to improve the land and the outcomes on the land at the same time as putting that into the market and creating some sense of partnership with people who are buying the food, who at the moment, you know, very often they're looking at price only. Can they be told something else? And I think a lot of consumers would like to know that they were part of the solution through backing supply chains that are linking some of this stuff up. So I think there's real opportunities there.
Oh, thanks. Do you know what? That is a brilliant segue to our next speaker. So thanks so much, Tony. That's
my pleasure.
You've done us proud. You know,
thanks, Dave.
Really good. So I'm going to hand over now to my Sustainable Food Trust colleagues, and hopefully Patrick's there. I see he's on the chat anyway, and over to you guys to introduce Patrick Holden.
Maybe I should introduce myself. Is that right?
Even better, Patrick. Introduce yourself.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and hello, Tony. What a great talk. I agree with everything you said, of course. I want to share a farmer perspective, but before I do that, I'd just like to remark on a talk I heard last year from a woman called Vandana Shiva, and she's a great Indian environmentalist and campaigner. And she said that, you know, all the talk is about preserving the pristine wilderness areas, but as we now know from David Attenborough in his extinction program, the world, unfortunately, we've removed much of the pristine wilderness areas of planet Earth, and the majority of the habitable area is now covered with farms, small and large, intensive and less so. So if we want to address irreversible climate change and biodiversity loss and water pollution, then what we need to do is change the way we farm, not just in the microcosm, but at the macrocosm. So I want to sort of report, as it were, from the farm, because I've had the great fortune to be stewarding a small parcel of planet Earth situated in West Wales, about 10 miles from the coast, for the last 47 years. And my farm, because it's on the top of a hill, is a catchment area. I like the metaphor of thinking as farms as the cells of the farm ecosystem. So if you think of the farming ecosystem as a great giant organism spanning the whole planet, then the farm is the cell. And we need to restore all the cells of nature's ecosystems back to individual health. And then at a scale, we can have landscape health. So although my farm is just one small piece of land, and I just pinned up behind me on the wall a picture of our farm painted by my daughter in the time when we were selling carrots. And my farm is a story. It's a story of integrated, relatively sustainable land management, which we practiced for many years. And one of the points I want to make in this short talk is that, unfortunately, for most of that time, it's been very hard to make it economically viable. It is about the money. If we want to change farming systems at scale, we need to make sure that the kind of farming that I've been doing becomes more financially viable than it has been. But my farm is also part of a wider catchment area, namely the Arun Valley in West Wales. And literally during my farming lifetime, I've seen a massive change in that river catchment area. I've seen, as Tony mentioned at the beginning of his talk, many flood events because we rent some river meadows just about 3 miles down on the River Arun. And unfortunately, during high rainfall events, which we've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks, the river goes that terrible, turgid, orange, brown color. And then because I have an ancient method of measuring water quality, namely I swim in it. I'm a wild swimmer, and I've been swimming for many years in ponds, rivers, and oceans. Unfortunately, because of what's happened in my farming lifetime, I do not want to swim in the River Arun even during the summertime, let alone at this time of year when it all goes orange. But I do swim in Cardigan Bay regularly, and literally it is like swimming in 2 different kinds of sea. In the summertime, where there are more or less no flood events, the water goes blue and you can see into it and it's wonderful. And then at this time of year, and I literally swam in it just 10 days ago, it goes all silty. And I've seen that flying from the air over Cardigan Bay at this time of year. And in the winter, you really do see this plume, as Tony described it, of brown water, which permeates right down the coast from the main river outlets. And that is what we have to address. So if we're going to do that, we need to measure the impacts of our farming system. And I know my colleague Adele Jones is going to be speaking about this later, but unfortunately, I have not kept accurate records of the impact of my farming system on all the key outcomes: the soil, the water, the biodiversity, the nutrient cycling, all the rest of it. And I believe that one of the key solutions to improving the impact of the individual cells of the farming system on outcomes which would represent public goods would be an annual sustainability audit, which every farmer has to undertake, which I believe should be part of ELMS, so that the government can start building up data about the impact of every farm, and then collectively we can see what its impact will be on society as a whole. You can't manage what you don't measure. So we've been involved very much with developing this framework of categories and metrics for measuring sustainability outcomes. And we are hopeful that the Welsh Government will require its use as part of the audit process for what they are doing to replace the single farm payment scheme. And I want to also highlight something else, which if I was to be asked the question, why is it that the River Erin, for instance, has become so contaminated that there are virtually no migratory fish left in that river? And that is true of all the rivers in the West Wales catchment. I'm afraid to say that it's the intensification of farming, and that has been made possible mainly by the use of nitrogen fertilizer. Nitrogen is the key driver for intensification. So if you look at the dairy herds in my river that are causing enormous pollution, I'm not blaming the farmers, or not all of them anyway, but the truth is, if you overstock, you can only overstock if you use nitrogen fertilizer. You could, of course, offshore your feed inputs if you have an intensive chicken unit or something like that. But if I'm talking about dairy cows, which are the main polluter in our area, it is about high nitrogen use, which not only contaminates the water, but it also allows overstocking and then creates this massive problem of manure disposal, which shouldn't be a problem at all if you reduce the stocking rate to the capacity of the land without nitrogen fertilizer. So do not underestimate. If you look at biodiversity loss, you look at river pollution, if you look at manure contamination, it all goes back to nitrogen fertilizer, which has been the key driver of intensification. And yet the government have been massively reluctant to make the polluter pay and to make land managers accountable for the impacts of their farming systems, in part because we haven't been measuring them, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm probably coming nearly to the end of my time, so I better just make a few points because I want to end on an optimistic note. What should we do to reverse this very sad decline in the river water quality and in the general depletion of natural and human capital that I've seen during my farming lifetime? Well, the first point, as I already put in the chat, is that we need to make sure that the monies that have previously been going to the single farm payment are redirected away in a way that applies to the whole farm and makes regenerative, sustainable, agroecological, organic, biodynamic, choose your term, doesn't matter which term you use, pay. Because at the moment, and I can testify to this, it hasn't paid well enough for the kind of farming practices that I've been using for many years to be adopted at scale. So this is a really important point. And how do you do that? Second point, you make the polluter pay. I've mentioned that, nitrogen fertilizer in particular, but also you regulate against the worst outcomes, and you can't do that unless you're measuring them. That's an important point. How do we measure water quality? We need to have outfall tests in the outfall of every farm, and that would put the fear of God into me and every other dairy farmer if they knew that my ditch or my stream had a regular monitoring event which I would be accountable for. So we need to measure, we need to redirect the subsidies, and we need to make sure that the lion's share of the money going to ELMS is applied on a whole farm basis to regenerative farming practices. We also need to collaborate, and we need to establish beacon farms to spread best practice, because farmers are best influenced by their peers. So in the state of Andhra Pradesh in India, a chap called Satya Tripali introduced a beacon farms network, which has resulted in 1 million farmers adopting organic and regenerative practices. He didn't do it through an advisory service. He did it by identifying the farms which were exhibiting best practice and enabling them to be knowledge spreaders. And the essence of that is collaboration between farmers. I think that's a really key driver for change. And finally, make sure that this measurement system enables farmers to become, to benchmark their own practice against sustainability outcomes, that governments use that data to reward farmers for increasing soil carbon, biodiversity, all the other things that we want to see, and then measure it and share that information with the farming community, with the investment community, with the governments, obviously, but also Tony's point again, we need the public to be able to be empowered to exercise their buying power in the marketplace to reward those farmers who are adopting the most sustainable practices. And so that means that the measurement system that we deploy needs to be linked to the marketplace in some way on food labels. I'll stop there. Hope that was useful.
That was great, Patrick. Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah. While I've both got you on there, Caroline Drummond's just sent a little curveball out around public procurement and the role that government could play with public procurement of food. Don't know if you both want to comment on that, and then we'll go and head for coffee break.
I think Caroline's right. I think public procurement is the fantastic opportunity to drive change ahead of the curve. If the government required every meal on the public plate, whether it's in prisons, care homes, hospitals, schools, to be sourced from sustainably, regeneratively produced food, that would be a massive driver for change. She's right.
Yes, couldn't agree more, Patrick. And I know Patrick's done great work on this over the years, not least through some of that work he did at the Soil Association, Patrick, to be able to drive that agenda. And yeah, it remains one that's a huge opportunity if it's grasped.
Thank you. And thanks, Caroline. We're really looking forward to the final plenary that Caroline's hosting tomorrow. So yeah, I see you're warming up, Caroline. Thank you. Okay, so it's coffee break time. So we've all got 5 minutes. Thanks so much to Patrick and Tony. Really sort of got the energy in the virtual room on those 2 keynotes. So very much appreciated. So if everyone can be back at sharp, my advice is just leave the Zoom link linked up. Don't disconnect anything. Just put it down and grab a cuppa and rejoin us at 11:05. Thank you.
Bye everyone. Thanks. Good luck.
Yeah,
See you later.
You.
Bye.
Bye.